All right. Let's dive into time management. You know that feeling when, like, there just aren't enough hours in the day?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you shared this YouTube script with us, and it's full of tips on working smarter, not harder. And it's even formatted like a script, which I thought was kind of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting how different formats tackle these universal challenges. And this one really dives into like redefining what time management even means. It's not about cramming more into your schedule, but being more deliberate with the time you have.
I like that being deliberate. So instead of feeling as we're constantly chasing the clock, we can actually start to feel like more in control.
Precisely. And this script lays out 5 specific techniques to help you do just that.
5 techniques. All right, I'm all ears. What's the first one?
The first one is all about prioritizing, figuring out which tasks actually deserve our time and energy. The source specifically mentions the Eisenhower matrix as a tool for this.
The Eisenhower matrix. You know, I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I fully grasp it. Can you break it down for me and our listener, of course?
Absolutely. Imagine a simple grid. You've got urgent on one axis and important on the other. This creates 4 boxes for you to categorize your tasks. For example, an urgent and important task might be a deadline that's looming, while something important but not urgent could be planning for a future project.
Ah, so it's a way to visualize what truly needs our attention right now versus what can wait. But isn't everything important to someone? How do you really decide?
That's where the deep dive comes in. It's not just about labeling, but understanding the underlying goals and values driving your choices. For example, imagine you're feeling overwhelmed with emails, errands, and a looming presentation. Using the Eisenhower matrix, you can categorize each task. Replying to a client email is both urgent and important, while organizing your desk, though it might feel pressing, is probably less crucial than finalizing that presentation.
So it helps you step back and see the bigger picture, instead of just reacting to the loudest or most recent demand on your time.
Exactly. It's about being strategic with your energy. And that leads us right into the second time management technique, planning your day.
Okay, planning. That sounds simple enough. But I have to admit, I'm not always the best at sticking to a schedule. What's this script's take on planning?
It emphasizes simplicity and focus. Forget the complicated color-coded calendars. Just take a few minutes each morning to identify your top 3 priorities for the day.
Just 3. That almost seems too easy.
It's about quality over quantity. Those 3 tasks should be the ones that, if completed, would make you feel like the day was a success.
Interesting. It's like a mini mission statement for your day.
Exactly. It helps you avoid getting bogged down in less important tasks and stay laser focused on what truly matters.
All right, so we've got prioritize and plan. What's the next time-saving secret?
Technique number 3 is the Pomodoro technique.
You know, I actually tried this once. The idea of breaking work down into intervals with short breaks just made sense to me. Did it work for you?
I find it incredibly valuable, especially when tackling complex or mentally demanding tasks. There's actually some fascinating research on why it's so effective, too.
Oh, I'm all about the science. What's the brain-based explanation behind the Pomodoro?
Well, our brains aren't wired for sustained high-focus work for hours on end. We naturally cycle through periods of focus and rest. The Pomodoro technique works with these natural rhythms instead of against them.
And so those short breaks aren't just about grabbing coffee. They're actually giving our brains a chance to, like, recharge and process information.
Precisely. And that can lead to better focus, creativity, and overall productivity.
Love it. It's like giving yourself permission to take breaks, knowing that it will actually make you more effective in the long run.
Exactly. And that brings us to technique number 4, one that might be a bit harder for some folks to embrace.
All right, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What's this challenging technique?
It's all about resisting the urge to multitask.
Wait, no more juggling 5 things at once. But isn't that how we get more done?
That's what we've been led to believe. But the research tells a different story. Our brains are simply not designed to effectively handle multiple complex tasks simultaneously.
So all those times I've had a conference call, while trying to answer emails and write a report,
Yeah.
I was actually doing all of those things poorly.
Most likely, yes. What happens is that we end up rapidly switching between tasks, which leads to errors, omissions, and a decrease in the overall quality of our work.
It's like trying to be in several places at once. You can't give your full attention to any of them.
And on top of that, research shows that multitasking actually increases stress levels and reduces our overall cognitive capacity. So not only are we not as effective, but we're also more stressed out in the process.
Okay, that's a pretty compelling argument against multitasking. I'm starting to see the light,
Mm.
so focus is key. What's the fifth and final technique in this script?
This one might be the simplest to understand, but often the hardest to put into practice. Learning to say no.
Ah, the power of no. I think a lot of us struggle with that, myself included. Why is this so important for time management?
It all comes down to boundaries and priorities. Saying yes to every request, every favor, every project can quickly lead to overwhelm and burnout.
It's like that feeling of having too many tabs open in your browser. Eventually, everything starts to slow down.
Exactly. Saying no is about protecting your time and energy for the things that truly matter, the tasks that align with your goals and values.
I'm starting to see how all these techniques are connected. Prioritizing helps us decide what deserves a yes, and the ability to say no protects that precious time and energy.
That's a great observation. These techniques aren't isolated. They work together to create a more intentional and fulfilling relationship with time.
All right, so we've covered these 5 time management techniques: prioritizing, planning, the Pomodoro technique, avoiding multitasking, and learning to say no. This has already given me a lot to think about. But before we move on, I'm curious, does this script offer any real-world examples of how to put these techniques into action?
It does. The YouTube script actually includes a sample daily schedule, but before we jump into that, I think it's worth exploring how these techniques connect to a bigger idea, something this script hints at but doesn't explicitly say.
Okay, I'm all about connecting the dots. What's the bigger idea here?
It's about mindset. This script subtly encourages us to shift from viewing time as an enemy to be conquered, to seeing it as a valuable resource to be managed.
Interesting. So instead of feeling like we're always fighting against the clock, we can start to feel more like we're in the driver's seat.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of our time, rather than letting it control us.
I love that. And I think it ties back to what we were saying earlier about being deliberate. If we see time as a resource, we're more likely to use it wisely, right?
Absolutely. It's like budgeting money. If you're mindful of your spending, you're more likely to make choices that align with your financial goals. The same principle applies to time.
That's a great analogy. So how does this mindset shift connect to the specific techniques we've been discussing?
Well, let's take prioritizing, for example. If we see time as a limited resource, we're more likely to be selective about how we spend it. We'll focus on the tasks that truly move the needle, the ones that align with our goals and values.
And saying no becomes easier, too, because we're not as willing to waste time on things that don't matter.
Exactly. And planning becomes less about cramming in as much as possible and more about strategically allocating our time to what matters most.
Okay, I'm seeing how this all comes together, but how does the Pomodoro technique fit into this mindset shift?
Remember how we talked about working with our brain's natural rhythms? When we view time as a resource, we're more likely to respect those rhythms. We understand that taking breaks isn't slacking off. It's actually essential for maintaining focus and productivity over the long haul.
It's like giving yourself permission to rest, knowing that it will actually help you accomplish more in the long run.
Precisely. And it reinforces the idea that we're in control. We're not slaves to the clock. We're using time strategically to achieve our goals.
Okay, I'm sold on this mindset shift, but I'm still curious about that sample daily schedule you mentioned. What does it look like?
Well, it's just an example, of course, but I think it highlights how these techniques can play out in a practical way. It starts with waking up and, you guessed it, planning your day.
So even before you reach for that first cup of coffee, you're taking a few minutes to set your intentions for the day.
Exactly. And this is where you identify those top 3 priorities we discussed earlier, the tasks that will make the day feel successful.
Okay, I'm on board with that. What happens next?
The schedule suggests starting your workday with a focused block of time, using the Pomodoro technique to tackle your most important task.
Makes sense. Get that big one out of the way while your energy is high. What about those pesky distractions we all face? Emails, social media, and the like. How does the schedule address those?
It emphasizes the importance of creating boundaries. For example, scheduling specific times to check email, rather than letting it interrupt your flow throughout the day.
Ah, so it's about being proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly. And that applies to social media as well. Maybe you schedule a short break in the afternoon to catch up on your feeds, but you avoid it during your focused work blocks.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. But what about those inevitable interruptions that pop up throughout the day? You know, the unexpected meetings, the urgent requests from colleagues.
That's where the flexibility we talked about earlier comes in. The schedule acknowledges that life happens. It's not about rigidly sticking to a plan, but rather about having a framework to return to once those interruptions have been dealt with.
It's like having a compass to guide you. even when you have to venture off the beaten path.
I like that analogy. It's about having a sense of direction, even amidst the chaos.
So this sample schedule is really more of a template that individuals can adapt to their own needs and preferences.
Exactly. It's a starting point, not a rigid prescription. The key is to experiment, find what works for you, and be willing to adjust as needed.
That's really empowering. It's not about finding the perfect schedule, but about creating a system that helps you make the most of your time based on your unique circumstances and goals.
Well said. And I think that's what makes this YouTube script so valuable. It's not just about providing a set of rules. It's about encouraging us to be more mindful, more intentional, and ultimately more in control of our time.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like we've really unpacked the essence of these time management techniques and, more importantly, the mindset shift that underpins them.
Yeah.
But I'm sure our listener has even more questions and insights to share. Welcome back to our deep dive into time management.
It's great to be back.
In the last part, we were talking about that shift in mindset, viewing time as a resource rather than an adversary.
Yes. And how that can empower us to make more conscious choices about how we spend our time.
And we explored how that shift connects to those 5 techniques from the YouTube script: prioritizing, planning, the Pomodoro technique, single tasking, and saying no.
Right. And how those techniques work together to create a more intentional and fulfilling relationship with time.
But I think there's another layer to this conversation, something that this script touches on but doesn't fully explore.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
It's the idea that effective time management isn't just about productivity, it's also about well-being.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
It's about creating a life that feels balanced and fulfilling, not just one that's packed with accomplishments.
Exactly. And I think that's where the techniques we've been discussing become truly transformative.
For example, learning to say no isn't just about protecting our time, it's also about protecting our energy and our mental health.
It's about setting boundaries and making sure we're not overcommitting ourselves to the point of burnout.
And planning our day isn't just about being efficient, it's also about creating space for the things that bring us joy and recharge us.
Whether that's spending time with loved ones, pursuing hobbies, or simply taking some time for ourselves to relax and recharge.
And prioritizing tasks isn't just about getting things done, it's also about making sure we're focusing on the things that truly matter to us.
The things that align with our values and our vision for our lives.
So effective time management isn't just about getting more done, it's about creating a life that feels meaningful and aligned with who we are.
Beautifully put, and I think that's what makes this YouTube script so insightful.
It encourages us to think beyond just checking things off our to-do list
Yeah.
and to consider how we can use our time to create a life that we truly love.
A life that feels both productive and fulfilling.
Well said. This has been such a fascinating exploration of time management, and I hope our listener feels inspired to take what they've learned and create a system that works for them.
A system that helps them achieve their goals, prioritize their well-being, and make the most of every precious moment.
And remember, the journey to effective time management is a personal one. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding what works for you, experimenting, and being willing to adjust as needed.
Exactly. It's about embracing the process and enjoying the journey.
So keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep making time for what matters most. Until next time, happy time.